Hello and welcome to the Business of Story. I'm your host, Park Howell, considered by many as the world's most industrious storyteller, because I help leadership, sales teams, and even human resources teach their people how to excel through the business stories they tell. And I'm so glad you're with us today. You, by the way, can apply my approach to business storytelling with my new book, Brand Bewitchery, which shows you how to wield the story cycle system to craft spellbinding stories for your brand. Grab your copy right now on Amazon or Apple Books. On today's show, you are going to learn from a brand consultant and leadership coach how to use your uniquely offbeat story to nudge the world in any direction you choose. And if you know me, I am a big proponent of nudging the world in any direction you choose through the stories you tell. But before we get into that, here's another story marketing moment just for you. So much of my work over the past 35 years has been either bringing high definition to a brand through its story or redefining the company's story altogether. If you find yourself either defining or redefining your brand story, here's a cool exercise to help you determine what your position is in the marketplace. First, ask yourself what problem you solve and for who. With this in mind, walk through these 4 questions. Number 1, what industry do you operate in? 2, what category in that industry do you operate in? What specialty do you provide in that category? And finally, what is your number 1 specialty? The thing you do to solve that problem differently and more distinctively than anyone else. Our guest today, Cassa Grant, is a brand consultant and leadership coach. She just went through our Build a Better Brand Story Sprint. Here are Cassa's answers to those questions. She operates in the business services industry, as do millions upon millions of other companies, so that's not a differentiator. We're just starting. Her category in that industry is leadership coaching. So now she's narrowed down into the hundreds of thousands of competitors. So we need to get even more focused. Cassa's specialty is personal brand consulting, which focuses her story even more. Her number 1 specialty or position statement is that Cassa Grant is the go-to coach to help offbeat leaders find their authentic rhythm in their career and with their people to make the personal impact they seek. I'll let Cassa reveal how this all welled up to her compelling purpose statement that she's going to share with you at the end of today's show. This is the first exercise we call your backstory in the story cycle system to define what you do differently and more distinctively than anyone else. It's basically setting the stage for the rest of your brand narrative. You can do this exercise yourself, guided by my book, Brand Bewitchery, or in my online course at businessofstory.thinkific.com, or with me during an upcoming Build a Better Brand Story Sprint, which Cassa is a graduate of now. Either way, do yourself a favor and get absolutely clear with your position statement so you won't lose your people or confuse your customers. It's your first step out of the primordial muck of commoditization. So now you know, today's guest, Cassa Grant, is a brand and leadership coach and consultant who helps offbeat leaders be understood, get more buy-in, and feel really good about how they spend time in their business. She uses years of communications and brand experience to help her clients communicate clearly and get things done.
That whole idea of legitimacy really affects the way that you lead. And so if you're not really owning, like, yes, I'm kind of a weirdo leader, I'm going to be doing these different types of things, and we're going to speak in airplane metaphors or whatever. You have a disconnect between who you are and who you want to be. And so you can't actually really embody who you need to be in order to help your team.
Cassa believes that being offbeat is an asset because you bring a wealth of life-learned lessons education, struggles, and exposure from different walks of life. This is a much richer place to lead from. So, she's going to show you how to do that exactly. Please welcome to the Business of Story, Cassa Grant. So my question to you to start this out is, what is the problem we are solving for our listeners today?
Helping them own their weird. If you're weird, if you feel a little bit weird, own it. If you're an offbeat leader, really own it.
That's perfect. We are going to explore that today. How do you own your weirdness? Welcome to the show, Cassa Grant. Great to have you.
Thank you so much, Park. I really appreciate it. It's great to be here.
We got to meet on what was my group one of the Build a Better Brand Story Sprint. So thank you for your pioneering experience, attitude and weirdness to join that, because I learned so much from you guys during that I've incorporated in sprint number 2, sprint number 3, and soon to be sprint number 4. So Thank you for that.
Oh, yeah. I was so happy to be part of it. It was such a great group. And I do this for a living, but when you're too close to it, it's so hard to really articulate the things that matter. And you've got such great systems for helping us find those nuggets. So it was really wonderful. I'm so glad I did it.
Well, thank you so much for that. And I'm glad you were part of the group. The real power in it that I was not thinking about, I didn't anticipate it. It wasn't my instruction as it was as much as you all coaching each other. I was kind of the guide through it, but those conversations that came up were really, really powerful. And I've even made some modifications to the course because of that. So less instruction from me, more about what's happening in your lives and your story as you're building your brand story, and made a big difference.
Yeah, and that workshopping and that feedback format was so powerful for me. That live element, I mean, sometimes I get a little bit of course fatigue. I need that group or being seen, basically. I mean, and I think a lot of people would agree with this. Like, if you join these groups or you join these courses wanting to gain something, having that element of live coaching and or group feedback is super crucial for me. I just engage way better and I get way more out of it.
Well, it was fun getting to know you and see your story come together through this process. So let's talk about owning your weirdness. Why is that a problem?
I would say it's a problem because with the people that I've worked with, they start to have this underlying feeling of, am I legit? And this is something we talked about before, and that can show
And these are leaders, right? Leaders of companies.
Yeah, usually leaders of small businesses or, companies under 10 million. Also, I work with entrepreneurs who are either solopreneurs or very small businesses. And I do classify them as leaders because even if you're just leading yourself and your VA, you're still out there forging a path. You're still beating a way through the jungle. So but there's always this underlying, and we call it imposter syndrome. We call it the preposterous imposter syndrome, I think you had come up with, which I liked. But, it shows up because people have this nagging feeling like, am I doing the best thing I could be doing right now? Am I showing up in the best way I could be showing up? So, that can show up as lack of organization in the company, not being able to retain people, really like slow growth or no growth, and then blind spots really holding them back. So, I mean, like what we were just talking about, if I hadn't come to the story sprint, it would have been a lot harder for me to see the places that I was missing. And a lot of leaders struggle with that too. So having that person who can go, yeah, this is a blind spot and we can work on it, or you're making this up. That's what I do for them. I help them be that mirror and figure out, well, what's important here and what's not. The weirdness comes in is that a lot of these people have taken kind of, I would call, a non-traditional path to these roles. Like, we might not have an MBA. They would be people like me who maybe have had a lot of different life experiences, but are still really interested in what they're doing and going, wow, this is a new adventure. Like, business is my new adventure, but I'm still feeling like I could be doing a lot better, and maybe a little bit of a feeling of not being up to snuff because of having that lack of the clear-cut path, if that makes sense.
Yeah. What I liked about how your story came together is when you really identified your core audience, and you already had them. It's when you articulated them and you had everybody in the group nodding their head. You said you help the offbeat leader.
Right.
And I like that because there are so many leadership coaches. You're one of millions of leadership coaches. So how do you separate yourself and define yourself in the market? Well, it's who you are for, and you are for that core slice of the offbeat leader. And I know how powerful it is because in sprint number 2, I talked about you and some of the others in sprint number 1 and how you refined your story and got to that offbeat leader. And I had a leader in our group, and I know her very well here in town. She immediately said, I need to talk to Cassa. Because I think she sees herself as an offbeat leader. She is extraordinarily professional and powerful in her own way. But that really intrigued her. And I think I know that is the power of a well-defined story by knowing your audience.
Mm-hmm. And I think I also said in the call, I want the weirdos. I want the people who identify as being offbeat, being a little bit not. I guess I always had this business idea of someone I call Patty Shoulder Pads. It's like an 80s lady with like a real wild power suit and white business pumps or whatever. And that's not the case. I mean, she would actually be very offbeat now. But, it's not this cookie cutter idea of what leadership is or what a business owner is. And so the more I homed in on that, because that's what's attracted to me anyway. So it makes more sense for me to really hone in on that and just say it. Like, yeah, I want the weirdos. Come to me, weirdos.
All right. So all you weirdos listening out there, and by the way, I'm one as well, we will in a few minutes, cover some of the insights that Cassa has for you and I. But before we do that, give us your origin story, backstory. How are you uniquely equipped through your life experiences to coach the weirdos out there, the offbeat leaders?
That's a great question. So yeah, I mean, I'm not going to go too far back, but I will start out that I grew up on a ranch in Montana. So right there away, you're just kind of, when you go out into the rest of the world, people are just like, are you serious? How did this, like what? So, coming from this very rural background, which I know you can identify with, I definitely got very inured into this storytelling tradition from the old cowboys from a very young age. And then moved out to California and lived in San Francisco on and off for years in undergrad. And I was a teacher. And then my second year of teaching, I took this trip on this adventure travel bus called the Green Tortoise and down to Mexico. It was really wonderful because it gave me the courage to do something that I probably wouldn't have done by myself as a solo 23-year-old traveler. I had to get my passport for it. I mean, I had been out of the country before, but this was like the first trip by myself. And I always wanted to travel, but I just didn't really know how. And so getting on that bus was a really great way for me to start getting my feet wet. And I met so many people one guy would work for the BBC and he was on a round the world year-long trip. And all these people who had really made travel like a big part of their lives. And it was just really inspiring to me and I realized I knew from a young age I really wanted to travel a lot, but I just couldn't see how. Hearing their stories really helped me go, oh, yeah, I could absolutely do this. And so I took a couple more trips with them, and then I decided to become a driver, which I had not anticipated in a million years. I think my whole life could be like,
Give us a quick glimpse of the life and times of an adventure bus driver.
Yes. Okay. So I thought I'd a couple stories for this. And this is where this does carry over for the leadership thing, because of course we're leading, we had groups of around 30 people, 36 sometimes, and we'd be doing trips between, we do cross country trips from San Francisco to Boston and then back, and we do northern and southern routes. We do up to Alaska and down through Mexico, through mainland Mexico. And so, you get to know each other really well. It's wonderful. This one group, we were doing a cross country going through Texas, and it was a great group. We had some problems with the INS because people didn't have their passports on the bus and they were not American citizens and things like this. And then you're driving through Texas, and it's just like, I don't know if you've ever driven through Texas, but it just feels like, oh, we're still in Texas. Yes, it's been like 3 days. And Texas is a beautiful state, but it takes a long time to drive across. So one night we actually have a converted sleeper coaches where they sleep on the bus while we drive at night. And so it's like a big bed. And I was fueling the bus before the night drive and everybody was ready to go to sleep, but they can't, there's like trucks and stuff. They're not really sleeping. There's like lights coming in and stuff. So they were all waiting like, oh, when's Cassa going to get here so we can go to sleep? And it took an hour to pay for the fuel at this truck stop. Right. And I'm like this 25-year-old with pigtails and just like waiting for the fuel in the fuel line. And I don't know what was wrong, but basically it took a really long time. And I get back on the bus and there was this one guy, this German computer programmer named Florian. he was just this classic, like, European tourist, but he had this gray fanny pack with like a little compass on the front. It's like this typical, like a guy who's not really outdoorsy trying to be outdoorsy, And so he had this. So I used to tease about this fanny pack all the time. Oh, it's in the front right now. Is that fanny pack executive, Florian? And like, oh, it's to the side. Is that fanny pack sporty? And like he was just like, you think you are funny, Cassa, but I do not understand. And then so I get back on the bus. They're all waiting. I'm tired. I wasn't tired, but I was just tired of waiting. And I'm just like ready to roll. And I get on the bus and he goes, once again, Cassa, I am completely amazed by your total lack of competence. And I was just like,
that's beautiful.
Thanks, F-Dog. Because what else can you say? Right? What else can you say at that point? And it's like, you can't sit there and go, oh, it wasn't my fault. I mean, it wasn't my fault, but there are so many times as a leader where even when it's not your fault, of course it's not your fault. All you can do is let them know the situation and give them the best information that you have and then roll, And that something like that, I can definitely see parallels in those types of situations. Another one is like we used to always give we call it a little wrap before we go out for the day or whatever. Like, here are the sites that you might be interested in or whatever. And here's what the day's going to look like, right? And so at the end of it, say, okay, does anyone have any questions? My favorite one that I got was, if I don't eat now, will I be hungry later?
You said, absolutely not. You never get hungry on the adventure bus.
Never, ever again. And you'll be fine forever. Just, the real question was, should I take my lunch with me when I go hiking? And that's what they were trying to get at. So I think also as a leader, that's definitely a story I use a lot in my coaching is this idea of when people ask you questions, oftentimes there's a real question behind that question, right? So getting into what is that real question? What's the real fear here? And how do you help allay that fear? I think is really the main point of that. That's one of my favorite. We also had someone ask, are we going to be closer to somewhere or nowhere today?
That's a very legit question.
Something or nothing. Yeah.
I ask myself that question every single day when I walk into the business story. Is today, am I actually going to get closer to something or further away when it's all said and done?
Right? Yes.
Isn't that business?
We actually made a something or nothing-o-meter, like out of cardboard of like, well, we hope something.
You grew up in Montana on a ranch, so I kind of picture this Dorothy syndrome. Get me the hell out of Kansas. You go out to the Bay Area, you teach for a while, you take an adventure bus ride, you decide what the hell, I'm all in as an adventure bus driver. Then what happened in your life? Where'd you go next?
I actually went back to school. So I got my master's in I say my master's in hippie, but it's environmental planning and resource management. And I was so passionate. I actually got really depressed. Around 20, I call it my quarter life crisis. I just started to think, I don't think humans are going to make it on the planet. The planet will make it. I just don't know if we are. And it really affected me a lot. And so there were a couple of classes that I'd taken as an undergrad, which was in English. And I was really considering grad school. So I did. I went and did that, and it was wonderful and really helped me think differently. Like undergrad, you're writing papers an hour before they're due, and in grad school, you really have to show up as a serious scholar. They are disciplining you in that way of thinking, and that was geography. So, or one of my geography professors used to say, go out and do some geography. So I felt like I had done a lot of geography and now I should probably learn a little bit more. But yeah, it was human geography. So then after that, I was finishing my thesis, and I had a good friend who was also a tortoise driver who had been going down to Antarctica for years and been trying to get us all to go down too. And I was like, well, again, why not? I don't have anything better to do. So started going down to, we call it the ice, in 2011. And was down there on and off for about 5 years. It was 3.5 years of my life total. So 3 winters and 3 summers.
Where was this?
Antarctica, at McMurdo Station.
Antarctica. Okay. Gotcha.
Yep. So,
and what were you doing down there?
Well, when I was a bus driver at first, we have these huge...
Seriously?
Yes. My friends now are always like, wait, you were a bus driver? Because I have so many stories of like driving a party bus in San Francisco and driving a Terra bus in Antarctica. So we actually land the planes on the permanent ice shelf. It's about 15 miles from McMurdo. And so we have to have a lot of passenger transport back and forth to the airfield. And, nobody has their own vehicle there. It's like pooled vehicles and stuff. So We have a shuttles department, and we have these vehicles with wheels that, like, the tires are 5, they're taller than me. They're like 5 feet tall, basically 5 or 6 feet tall. Big snow tires on them. So they're really cool vehicles. They just bounce you right along as you're rolling on the snow. So I started out there, and then got into logistics management, which I actually really loved. I never thought I would do something like that again. But it was wonderful. That was when I really got more into data management and people
Mhm.
management, as in a huge behemoth organization with this group of, you could absolutely call them offbeat leaders and not leaders. And we have kind of we have like the beakers, they're the scientists, and then we have the hippies, or whatever you want to call the other one, what I would have fallen into, or maybe the offbeat people. And then we have the military. The Air National Guard actually runs a lot of the planes down there. There's kind of this interesting military contingent. And then you kind of have like I would call it kind of I mean, not really a hillbilly contingent, but like you definitely have like kind of older, crusty, like equipment operators. And they're great. But it's like you see these four factions, like, and it's a really bizarre mix, but it makes for, again, great stories for sure.
So you probably never figured at this point you would be coaching offbeat leaders and helping people embrace their weirdness and put it to work for them, but you were around it, so you were being educated as you lived in it in Antarctica.
Absolutely. And thank you for pulling that together, because that's exactly right. I mean, there were people who had started out as the lowest of the low, the dining assistant doing dishes, who rose through the ranks to be station manager. There were a lot of us who remembered them at that lowest of the low level, moving up through the ranks. And, I do talk a lot about that too, of like when you come into a situation, because I struggled with that with one of my employees. We had come in at the same time, but when I became his boss a couple of years later, we struggled with that sense of hierarchy almost, and it was hard for me to say, hey, this is what we need to do right now, and really own that I'm your boss, because we had this friendly history, right? So you definitely saw lots of examples of how to do that well and poorly down there for sure.
So it's that balance between the professional and the personal side of someone that comes up through the ranks and maybe they surpass you
Yeah.
and you have to deal with them.
And also just the
Yeah.
courage to be able to be who you are, but still be taken seriously as a legit leader. Someone who may have worn a flamingo costume to the Christmas party, or, if you didn't, then you really were the weirdo who was this like head of operations or whatever. And so really going, okay, yeah, they wore a flamingo costume to the Christmas party a couple of days ago, but now we're in this high level planning meeting, and I still take them seriously, of course, right? And there's a difference between oversharing and this kind of, hey, look at me, Instagramified, I'm a weirdo kind of thing. It's more about understanding how certain of those stories really make you more powerful as a leader versus not. Because I feel like a lot of people that I work with, they don't want to overshare. They really are careful of people's boundaries, which I think is really important. But it's also about having that courage to give a little bit more. Oh, I have band practice tonight. Like, I'm in 4 bands or whatever. Like, I mean, a lot of them wouldn't even if they talked about it, they wouldn't talk about it a lot, or they wouldn't talk about it in ways that were really relevant to their people, if that makes sense.
Can you share someone you've worked with, and you can use, a different name to protect the innocent, someone who just when you met them were so offbeat and so weird that maybe on one hand you asked yourself, how do they even get along in life and let people and lead people in that process? And on the other hand, saying, wow, that weird is their absolute superpower and they're using it pretty well.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I would probably go to this guy who led the fuels department for years down there, and this is the flamingo costume. I mean, he actually really imbued that sense of fun and weirdness into the department as well. Like, they were always they're called fuelies. We would say fuelies or coolies, like, I mean, maybe I just said that, but like that department was very highly sought after. It's hard work. It's cold work. You are outside all day.
And this is fueling vehicles, the fuelies.
So we store all the fuel for the year in these huge tanks. So they have to transfer it like all over the place. Basically, it runs the buildings. It runs all kinds of things. So essentially, they're moving fuel around, however that might be, getting it off the tanker, keeping it for storage, putting it where it needs to go. But yeah, like I said, it's hard work. It's mostly outside work, and it's and stinky, of course, right? It's not really a fun job. I mean, maybe I haven't done it, so I couldn't really say for sure. But the department itself, because of this cult of personality that he had built up around having fun, but still being legit, being serious, getting things done safely, because it's a very dangerous job too, I would say he created a really powerful department, which was fantastic. So, and I think you see that in some other places where it's kind of this, I mean, not necessarily a sense of like smoke jumpers or people who are in these kind of high demand, exciting roles. So, because like I said, their role probably wasn't very exciting, technically speaking. But
What did you do after Antarctica? What was the next chapter in your journey around the world?
well, I was lured to New Zealand by a fella. He was a mechanic at Scott Base, which is the Kiwi base right next to McMurdo. It's about 2 miles away. We started dating in 2014, and then we were long distance for like he was gone. He was going to Mongolia. He worked in Mongolia for about 8 months, and I had signed a full year contract, so I was on the ice. So we were long distance for a while, and then went and did some stuff in New Zealand. Did another winter in Antarctica, and then it was easier to do the whole let's see if our relationship works here in New Zealand than it was in the States. But coming out of that, I applied for like 160 jobs when I got to New Zealand. And I got like 4 or 5 interviews. And it starts to give you this, again, chip on your shoulder of like, what is going on? But I didn't have full residency yet. And one of the kindest things that happened, and I will never forget this woman from one of the bigger corporations that I applied with called me up and was like, look, you're a really interesting candidate. I don't want you for this job that you applied for, but I'm really interested in you and I'd love to have a chat with you. Could you come in? So I did. And she was really straight up. She was like, are you getting a lot of interviews? I was like, no. And she's like, here's why. You don't have a visa. You're going to continue to struggle at this level, because I wanted to be in the management level. I wanted to be where I had been. And I mean, I have a master's. It's not like I'm kind of like, let's go wait tables. Not that that's a bad thing, but I just wasn't, that didn't feel challenging to me at the time. And so having somebody validate me in that of like, yes, you're weird, but it makes you interesting. You're not unhireable. You just have a problem with one of your logistical like things was so powerful for me. And then I did actually end up getting a job, which was horrible. It had really bad culture. And so I was there for like a month. And then that was what really pushed me into like, I need to do my own thing. Like I know people are making money on the internet. What are they doing? And it's just been a journey from there, which has been, like I said, business is definitely my new adventure. I still love travel and I will always love travel.
I think it's important at this point to let our listeners know that if you were hearing squeaking and tweeting in the background, it's because Cassa is coming to you almost live, recorded from your caravan in some parking lot somewhere in Nelson, New Zealand, and you've lived in this rig with your boyfriend, your partner, whatever, for what, 2 years?
3.
Traveling around?
Yes, 3 years.
3 years.
Yeah.
3 years. So you are really expressing your weirdness, you weirdo.
I sure am.
In that,
and actually,
in the most wonderful way.
I will correct you respectfully. We're at the beach, not a parking lot.
Are you parked on the beach or in a parking lot?
No, yeah.
You're not behind a Walmart, at least.
No. Yes, we are. I'm looking at the water right now. So, yeah, I definitely have turned into quite the beach lover here. So that's, yeah. But yeah, the caravan made sense for us, and that's the other thing about what I do with my clients is figuring out.
By the way, is this the same guy that lured you from the Antarctica?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
How long have you all been together?
6 years.
6 years.
Yeah.
And real quick, what is it like living in a caravan for 3 years in New Zealand?
Oh, it's awesome.
And being a professional and a coach and coaching people around the world. How's that work?
It's amazing. Like I said, I never would have dreamed that I would be able to do this. Or, I mean, clearly I didn't even have the conceptualization of that this is even possible, so I love it. It's wonderful. It's not for everybody. The caravan is definitely not for everybody, but it is for us. We love it and we're very into it. So, all the people around are just like, wait, you guys live like you're on holiday all the time. And it's like, well, we're working,
or on the run, one of the two.
Yeah, we kind of do because life, I mean, my father passed away at 48 and I think I just never felt like I had time to not do the things that were important to me. And that is also what I try to help my clients do. What is right for you? What is important for you? And a lot of people either have a hard time answering that question or they actually just don't know. Or even if they do know, they don't feel like they have the ability or the permission to go do that. And so, yeah, I mean, but I do believe that you can, and that's why I do it.
I would imagine that your customers don't show up with their hands raised saying, Cassa, I'm a weirdo. I'm an offbeat leader. Help me out. Is it more like they show up like, look I'm good at what I do, but nobody's paying attention to me, or they don't get me, or I don't know what? I mean, how do they show up for you? And then you say, Grasshopper, you are definitely a weirdo offbeat leader. I am just the person for you.
I mean, I would say that the two biggest things that I see with my clients, and I'm boiling it into a nutshell, but am I good enough? Am I smart enough? Do people like me? A confidence thing, right? That boils down into confidence. And having that sounding board of somebody who's outside of their organization who can listen to them and ask them the tough, like really challenging questions that people who are working with them, A, wouldn't necessarily have the context to ask, and B, it would not behoove them to ask that person, right? Especially if at the CEO level or something like this. The other person that I see who is someone who has great ideas, know that they have great ideas. And I'm sure you see these people a lot too, but they just have a hard time getting their point across. They brain dump too much. They don't know how to really say the things that matter and really get across what matters. And so I help them figure out what matters and then convey that in a way that is going to be heard, because it's not even just about saying what you want to say. It's also about saying it in a way that people can really hear you.
What is interesting to me about your backstory is you've got this master's as hippie, as you said, in environmental studies. You're also English lit, major, studied that, but an award-winning copywriter. So you were in the marketing advertising world for a long time. So words obviously come natural to you. And I think that probably helps you with coaching your clients to get them to focus, to get them to be more articulate, to share their side of it. But you had also told me, and I'd like for you to expand on this a little bit because I don't know if I have it completely right, but I believed you were working in the technology world and kind of went from writer into, all of a sudden you're like operations and having to help with operations direction. And so can you clarify that for me?
Well, that was with one of my big clients, and they are wonderful clients, and I really have loved working with them. And what has happened with that relationship, which has evolved, is it, yeah, I did start out with writing for them, and I wrote some training things for them. Like they needed a training manual, they needed some training materials, and then I started to basically go into more of a consulting role. And then I got into coaching with them as well. So our relationship, again, like I said, it evolved. I wouldn't say I was doing operation stuff, but I was definitely helping see where are the gaps, where are your operations going haywire, and like what can we do to put things in place to help with that. So that was also very rewarding. Like it's nice to be able to work with a client long term and see the outcomes of the things that you help them with. Because sometimes you'll just come right in and go, okay, here's the thing, here's your branding, and see ya. And so I really like being able to see those things come to fruition a little bit more.
The reason why I wanted to bring that up is what we covered, the Build a Better Brand Story Sprint, and with you and with everybody that we work with. And I want our listeners to think about this as you are working on your own personal brand or professional brand. Go back and look at the intersections and crossroads in your life. And I was just writing down as you were talking, the intersection of weirdness. So if you just look at yours, I mean, an adventure traveler, you see the world, you took on a very iconoclastic way of leading your life in your younger years and came across and worked with a lot of strange offbeat leaders that had their own power, their own superpower in their own way. And then you combine that with your love of language, writing, helping people. Now you find yourself in a caravan parked near a beautiful beach, not behind a Walmart, in Nelson, New Zealand, coaching offbeat leaders around the world. It's just an extension of who you are, isn't it?
Yes, absolutely. And it feels like that. I feel very, like, again, very grateful, very excited, and excited to see where it takes me too. Like I think that this is the other thing with the internet. I mean, and I'm sure that you feel this too, is like geography has become, I mean, geography is still important, always will be important. I always am interested in why a place shapes what happens where there. But geography has become much more 4D basically, right? Like you and I are talking as if we were in the same room, thousands of miles away. And I think that we're still wrapping our brains around what that really means. But I always felt like that geography has gotten a lot smaller in terms of your accessibility to so many different things now. And it's just awesome. It's so cool to be a part of that. And I can't wait to see where it goes. We talked about this before too, of like stories. With my clients, I think about what are the words you're using? What are the stories you're telling yourself? And what is the identity that you're creating out of that? Like being a weirdo is a fine identity, but if you've got a weirdo with a chip on the shoulder, that's an identity that we really need to dig into. I mean, if you were a non-smoker, you would not identify as a smoker. You wouldn't think, oh, I need to go take a smoke break, or I need to buy another pack of cigarettes or whatever, right? But when you don't identify with something, you're just not that, right? So it's figuring out, well, what is this identity you're creating through these words and these stories? What parts of it do we want to keep? And then what parts of it do we want to reshape, let go, figure out? Because I am always about, accountability coaching and that kind of thing too, but we do go a couple of levels deeper, because what you believe affects your actions, which then affects your outcomes and your results. And so if you're only focusing on actions and results, you're actually not getting to the real issue. And that's where I'm interested in going, is that internal Mount Kilimanjaro, like you were saying when we talked before. I love that imagery, because it's like, I'm not going to be your therapist or something like this. We're not going into, but we are going to figure out this is a belief, and this is a belief that's creating an identity that is not helping you. And how do we get rid of it?
What happens when a leader does not embrace their inner weirdo?
I mean, I think it comes out in a lot of ways. I think it comes out in an overall sense of legit. Like I said, they don't feel legitimate. That whole idea of legitimacy really affects the way that you lead. And so if you're not really owning, like, yes, I'm kind of a weirdo leader, I'm going to be doing these different types of things, and we're going to speak in airplane metaphors or whatever. You have a disconnect between who you are and who you want to be. And so you can't actually really embody who you need to be in order to help your team. That can show up in all kinds of different ways, but it takes your legitimacy really through the roof once you start to really integrate these parts of yourself, and you stop holding yourself back.
Interesting. So final question, final exploration right here, and what our listeners can learn from you. You've traveled around the world, lived in all continents, I believe. And
I've been to all the continents. I haven't really lived on all of them. Africa, I've only been to for like a week or two.
okay.
But yes.
But having done a little bit of travel myself, nothing to the extent that you have, you are always thrown new and wild adventures every single day and never quite sure what's going to happen next. How has that shaped who you are today and how you coach your offbeat leaders?
Yeah, that's a great question, because I mean, as you know, nobody knows what's going to happen next. And I think that the number one thing I got out of being a tortoise driver was that I used to fret a lot. That was like a family habit. It was like, okay, if that cow heads off over there, you're going to cut it off at the pass over there. I mean, we were always catastrophizing. We were trying to figure out how to prevent things. And when I started driving for the tortoise, you just had no idea what was going to happen. And so it was like, I can't worry about it. All I can do is show up the best that I can, give the best that I can, and we're going to be okay. We are going to be okay. I mean, and it really is a situation where, you kind of ask yourself, is the worst thing that could happen is that someone could die? Yes, it is, when you've got 40 people behind you. So, you take your precautions to the level of responsibility, and then you have to let it go. And I think that is something that I always bring to my coaching with a lot of leaders, because you can tie yourself in knots with your stories so easily. And unless you start to learn to trust yourself and trust your abilities and trust your capabilities, it will continue to erode who you are as a person, and you won't be enjoying what you're doing. And that's what it's all about. I mean, that's the ultimate thing, is like, how do you continue to enjoy what you're doing?
Okay, I lied. One more question.
Oh,
Do offbeat leaders have a leg up on normal run-of-the-mill leaders?
Oh, I would totally say yes. Especially since you're an offbeat leader, Park, just to bring it back around and close the loop. Yeah, and for that reason, you have a different lived experience you can bring. And this is why diversity and inclusion is so important too, right? I actually had a mentor who was mentioning, he was like, he calls himself old, male, and pale, old, pale, and stale, male, pale, and stale, whatever. He's a very powerful business leader in Australia, and he had taken a course at Harvard. I think it was like a telecourse or something, but they did get together, and they all had to read these really intense business reports, and they were very heavy papers. And he was like, that was when I really saw the difference in diversity and inclusion, because most of the people at that table were not coming from my perspective. They were able to see things that I did not see. And that is the same thing around being an offbeat leader, is like, your life experience helps you see these things that you wouldn't be able to see if you had just gone to get an MBA and then gone to your first job and then da 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 da. You would not be able to see the patterns in the same way as the way that you can see them now, which makes you more resilient. Yeah.
You were 4 weeks removed from the Build a Better Brand Story Sprint. How is your story coming together?
It's coming together really well. Thank you so much. I'm actually in touch with a couple of people from the cohort that we were in, and we're keeping each other accountable. And it's been really, it's made it much easier for me to talk about what I do, for sure. Even if I don't say my whole blurb, every single blurb for every single thing, just having it clear in my mind makes it much easier to talk about. And, I also figured out my purpose statement, which is transforming people from who they think they are into who they really are. And that was something that came from that. I wouldn't have been able to come up with that. And so that they can make their mark on the world, they can actually make a difference, which is very lofty, of course.
That is awesome. Transforming people from who they think they are to who they really are.
That was the breadcrumbs from the story spread. Helped me kind of go, yes, that is what is powerful for me. That gives me chills. I love the thought of doing that. And so just having that process in place and working yourself along, and it was just great. And that's really helped me give that clarity that I needed.
And I'd like to give a shout out to James Spengler. He's been emailing me. He was one of the sprinters too, up out of Calgary, Canada, and doing some really interesting things about helping the reluctant presenter. So people that are brilliant in their own way, but they just hate presenting. They don't want to have any part of it. And he helps them overcome that. And I know you and he have been working very closely. He has been extraordinarily appreciative of your help from that, because he sends me the emails and the follow-up. And I just got one from him this morning. And that's what I love about this whole thing too, is how everyone is staying together and pitching in and helping one another. There's a lot of compassion that came out of this sprint, as the following ones have too.
I agree. And I think that being able to see someone else's stuff, I mean, I'm sure you've seen this too, able to see someone else's stuff objectively helps you look at yours a little more objectively too. But the community aspect of it was awesome. I mean, being able to connect with you in a more meaningful way was really powerful. And we found another mutual connection that lives here in New Zealand with me.
Bea, she's in the sprint right now, as a matter of fact. Did you know she joined our third one? Yeah.
We talked right before she joined. So
a brilliant social media specialist.
Exactly. So just creating these communities, regardless of geography, is just so powerful. And that's what I love about this type of thing that you're doing. And the stories too, because we all remember each other because we had to tell our stories over and over again.
Oh, yeah.
It's like, oh yeah, the matchmaker and the real estate, and you really remember what people do. I won't name them just so that they're not like, ooh. But it really does help you remember like the context, and you get those ahas a lot faster because we had refined our stories. At first, people were kind of showing up with like a lot of, I call it like the alphabet soup or the word soup, and then you start to get those ahas and go, oh right, like, okay, I get it. You're for the reluctant presenters, which I think James came up with. We came up with that in that press sprint. So
yeah, Jeff out of Toronto, another one of our sprinters, when he was listening, he said, well, you just said what it is. You are for the reluctant presenter. And James had missed it when he said it. I had missed it. And then as soon as Jeff mentioned it, it rang in everybody's head. And you could see everybody on that Zoom session just start nodding, saying, yes, 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 that's it. That was so cool. That was such a great moment. The other moment that I remember was our very first session. Everyone's popping in, and you popped in, one of the last people to pop in. And I thought, okay, all right, we got Cassa here from Nelson, New Zealand. Where the hell is she? Is she coming from a van? What is going on there? And it took me about a week to finally ask you where you're coming from. And there you are. You are broadcasting out of your mobile caravan home on the beach in Nelson, New Zealand.
Yes.
Very cool.
And thank you so much, Bart.
Oh, well, thank you. How can people learn more about you? Where shall we send them?
Oh, I'm so glad you asked. Yes. So my name is after a road in Wyoming. So it's like house in Spanish with 2 S's, but so it's Cassa Grant at cassagrant.com. So that's my email address or my website. And I do have a couple of resources for people too. So on the resources page, there's some downloads about how to tell stories well. I mean, it will complement what you give out to people for sure. I also have one around how to own your weird as a leader, and also how to boost your message, how to really be clear with what you're saying and what you're writing. So those are the 3 big downloads I have right now, but I think that it could be helpful for your audience as well, particularly the Own Your Weird one.
Great. We're going to send them to CassaGrant.com, CASSAGRANT.com.
Correct.
And I suppose if we need an in-office visit, we have to come out to Nelson, New Zealand, and meet up in your caravan.
That would be horrible, wouldn't it? We'll have a meeting on the beach. Yeah. Oh, and the other thing I have to say too, connect on LinkedIn. I love LinkedIn. I'm on LinkedIn a lot. As you know, like I love LinkedIn. So if you want to connect, please reach out, and I would love to connect with you there too.
Awesome. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you, Park. This is so fun. I really enjoy this podcast and all the work you do. I appreciate it a lot.
You know, if you appreciate this episode today, share it around. I mean, Cassa, she is so much fun. She has so much energy. She really knows what in the hell she's doing, especially to help you find your own weirdness and leverage it. Maybe you don't even have to find it. She will help you leverage it. And that is a huge thing in this day and age. And I think maybe even more important that now that we are remote and we are virtual and you don't get to have that one-on-one in-person meetings with folks, that your weirdness on Zoom actually can work really well in your favor. It's just a matter of embracing it, living into your story, and the purpose statement again. Cassa helps transform you from who you think you are to who you really are. To continue that thought, so you can have the impact in the world you seek. Love it. What a great story. Well, come on back and join us again next week when we will have another story artist here for you like Cassa. And oh, by the way, if you are interested in a Build a Better Brand Story Sprint in 2021, thank God we got 2020 in our rearview mirror, I will be doing them probably on a monthly basis. What they are is it's 3 weeks. We have 10 seats in it so that we can keep it really intimate and people have time to work with each other. 3 weeks, you get the Build a Better Brand Story Sprint textbook to work from. You get access to the online course and the interactive workbook in that. And then you get 6 live sessions with me and the whole team over the course of the 3 weeks. And what I've learned from the first few groups we do, the way that looks is instead of me giving you a bunch of instruction, which I thought they wanted, but it turns out no, they much rather have the guidance in the conversation, is the beginning of each week, I share with you a case story that comes out of a brand and how they've used the story cycle system and what their outcomes were so that you can see the outcomes that you were going for. And that takes 10 to 15 minutes, and then we open it up for conversation, and I teach you the story dynamics of the and, but, therefore, the 5 primal elements of story, and how to use and incorporate all of these so that you can create your overarching brand narrative and celebrate your weirdness, putting it to work for you, and maybe even more importantly, learning and knowing how to tell it. So everybody gets you, whether you get you or not at this point. So if you're interested, just come on over to businessofstory.com. You can learn more about the Build a Better Brand Story Sprints there. If you're interested in an upcoming one, shoot me an email, park@businessofstory.com, and I'll see about getting you in a future Build a Better Brand Story Sprint. With that, no matter what you do in the world, and no matter how you pull your story together, I want you to remember, of course, one thing, that the most important story you will ever tell is the story you tell yourself. So make it a great one. Thanks so much for listening.